Hello, Israel Ruth. Here's another story from Beatrix Potter. I read to you Peter Rabbit and Benjamin Bunny, and this is the third one about bunnies. Look, in the book, also, I don't know if we paid attention to this before, but here's a picture of Beatrix Potter on her farm in 1907. So that's a little bit after those first two books were published. And now, the third book, The Tale of the Flopsy Bunnies, published in 1909. The Tale of the Flopsy Bunnies pays another visit to the world of Peter Rabbit and Benjamin Bunny. Both rabbits have grown up. Benjamin has married Peter's sister Flopsy, and although he is still improvident and cheerful, has a large family to care for. Beatrix Potter was well aware that her earlier books had created a huge demand for rabbit stories and dedicated this one for all little friends of Mr. McGregor and Peter and Benjamin. Besides, she enjoyed painting rabbits and gardens too. When preparing the book in 1909, she was staying with her Uncle Fred and Aunt Harriet Burton at Gweinog. I'm not quite sure how to say that. Their large house in Wales, and made many studies of their garden there. She described it on her earlier visit as the prettiest kind of garden, where bright old-fashioned flowers grow amongst the currant bushes. It is beautifully depicted in her lovely illustrations. Here we go. It is said that the effect of eating too much lettuce is soporific. I have never felt sleepy after eating lettuces, but then I am not a rabbit. They certainly had a very soporific effect on the Flopsy bunnies. When Benjamin Bunny grew up, he married his cousin Flopsy. They had a large family, and they were very improvident and cheerful. I do not remember the separate names of their children. They were generally called the Flopsy bunnies. As there was not always quite enough to eat, Benjamin used to borrow cabbages from Flopsy's brother, Peter Rabbit, who kept a nursery garden. There's Peter, there's Benjamin, Flopsy, going and getting food for their many children, all the bunnies. Sometimes Peter Rabbit had no cabbages to spare. When this happened, the Flopsy bunnies went across the field to the rubbish heap in the ditch outside of Mr. McGregor's garden. There they go. Mr. McGregor's rubbish heap was a mixture. There were jam pots, paper bags, mountains of chopped grass from the mowing machine, which always tasted oily, and some rotten vegetable marrows, and an old boot or two. One day, oh joy, there were a quantity of overgrown lettuces, which had shot into flower. There they are, eating. The Flopsy bunnies simply stuffed lettuces. By degrees, one after another, they were overcome with slumber and lay down in the mown grass. Benjamin was not so much overcome as his children. Before going to sleep, he was sufficiently wide awake to put a paper bag over his head and keep off the flies. The little Flopsy bunny slept delightfully in the warm sun. From the lawn beyond the garden came a distant clackety sound of the mowing machine. The blue bottles buzzed about the wall, and a little old mouse picked over the rubbish among the jam pots. I can tell you her name. She was called Thomasina Tittlemaus, a wood mouse with a long tail. She rustled across the paper bag and awakened Benjamin Bunny. The mouse apologized profusely and said she never knew Peter Rabbit. While she and Benjamin were talking, close under the wall, they heard the heavy tread upon their heads, and suddenly Mr. McGregor emptied out a sack full of lawn mowings right upon the top of the sleeping Flopsy bunnies. Benjamin shrank down under his paper bag. The mouse hid in a jam pot. See him dumping out the bag. The little rabbits smiled sweetly in their sleep under the shower of grass. They did not awake because the lettuces had been so soporific. They dreamt that their mother Flopsy was tucking them up in the hay bed. Mr. McGregor looked down after emptying his sack. He saw some funny little brown tips of ears sticking up through the lawn mowings. He stared at them for some time. Presently, a fly settled on one of them, and it moved. Mr. McGregor climbed down on the rubbish heap. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 little rabbits, said he as he dropped them into his sack. The Flopsy bunnies dreamt that their mother was turning them over in bed. They stirred a little in their sleep, but still they did not wake up. Mr. McGregor tied up the sack and left it on the wall. He went to put away his mowing machine. While he was gone, Mrs. Flopsy Bunny, who had remained at home, came across the field. She looked suspiciously at the sack and wondered where everybody was. Then the mouse came out of her jam pot, and Benjamin took the paper bag off his head, and they told the doleful tale. Benjamin and Flopsy were in despair. They could not undo the string. But Mrs. Tittlemouse was a resourceful person. She nibbled a hole in the bottom of the corner of the sack. The little rabbits were pulled out and pinched to wake them. Their parents stuffed the empty sack with three rotten vegetable marrows, and old blacking brush, and 2 decayed turnips. Then they all hid under the bush and watched for Mr. McGregor. Can you see their little eyes peek around? Mr. McGregor came back, picked up the sack, and carried it off. He carried it hanging down as if it were rather heavy. The Flopsy bunnies followed at a safe distance. They watched him go into his house, and they crept up to the window to listen. Mr. McGregor threw down the sack on the stone floor in a way that would have been extremely painful to the Flopsy bunnies if they'd happened to be inside. They could hear him drag his chair on the flags and chuckle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 little rabbits, said Mr. McGregor. Eh? What's that? What have they been spoiling now? Inquired Mrs. McGregor. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 little fat rabbits, repeated Mr. McGregor, counting on his fingers. 1, 2, 3. Don't you be silly. What do you mean, you silly old man? In the sack. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, replied Mr. McGregor. The youngest Flopsy bunny got on the windowsill. Mr. McGregor took hold of the sack and felt it. Mrs. McGregor took hold of the sack and felt it. She said she could feel 6, but they must be old rabbits because they were so hard in all different shapes. Not fit to eat, but the skins will do fine in my old cloak. Line your old cloak? Shouted Mr. McGregor. I shall sell them and buy myself baccy, meaning tobacco. Rabbit tobacco. I shall skin them and cut off their heads. Mrs. McGregor untied the sack and put her hand inside. When she felt the vegetables, she became very, very angry. She said that Mr. McGregor had done it on purpose. Mr. McGregor was very angry too. One of the rotten marrows came flying through the kitchen window and hit the youngest Flopsy bunny. It was rather hurt. Then Benjamin and Flopsy thought it was time to go home. So Mr. McGregor did not get his tobacco, and Mrs. McGregor did not get her rabbit skins. But next Christmas, Thomasina Tittlemouse got a present of enough rabbit wool to make herself a cloak and a hood and a handsome muff to put her hands in and a pair of warm mittens. I guess they gave that to her as a thank you, don't you think? The end. There's actually a story in here about Thomasia Tittlemouse, too, so we'll have to read that as well. I love you, Rael Ruth Toller. Bye-bye.